My name is Leo Vance. For the better part of 2 decades, my life has been one of quiet restoration. I am a luthier. In my small workshop, nestled in the eaves of our old craftsman house in Cedar Creek, I give voice back to the silent. I take splintered violins, weary cellos, and forgotten violas, and with patience, glue, and reverence, I make them sing again. The air in my workspace is a constant, comforting perfume of spruce sawdust, aged maple, and amber varnish. It's a solitary profession, one that rewards stillness and a delicate touch, and it has suited me perfectly. My world is one of nuanced adjustments, of listening for the subtle dissonances that signal a deeper structural flaw, of understanding that true strength often lies in flexibility, not rigidity. The house itself is much like the instruments I mend. It was my grandmother Eleanor's, a sturdy home built from old-growth timber with a wide, welcoming porch and windows that catch the morning light just so. After she passed, I inherited it, and for the past 10 years, my wife, Clara, and I have polished its floors, tended its gardens, and filled its rooms with the quiet hum of our life together. I saw our marriage in the same light, as a beautiful, resonant structure that required constant, loving maintenance. I believed we were building something that would last, something that would mellow and deepen with age, like the seasoned wood of a master's violin. The evening it all came apart began like any other autumn Tuesday. A cool breeze, smelling of rain and fallen leaves, drifted through the open window of my workshop. Below me, the city of Cedar Creek was beginning to sparkle, its lights a soft counterpoint to the deep indigo of the twilight sky. I was planing the neck of a particularly stubborn viola, the shavings curling away from the blade in fragrant, paper-thin ribbons. I was lost in the work, in the pleasant friction of steel on wood, when the familiar creak of the third stair announced Clara's arrival. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light of the hallway. She wasn't wearing her usual comfortable lounge clothes. Instead, she was dressed in a sharp, tailored blazer and trousers, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style I hadn't seen in years. She looked like she was heading to a boardroom meeting, not stepping into the gentle chaos of her husband's workshop. "Leo," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. It was a voice I didn't recognize. I set my plane down carefully on the workbench. "Clara? Is everything all right? You're dressed up." "We need to talk," she said, not moving from the doorway. She held a sleek, leather-bound portfolio under her arm. "Of course." I wiped my hands on my apron, a faint tremor of unease starting in my gut. "Let's go downstairs. I'll make some tea." "No," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet air. "Let's talk here. In your space." There was a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer in the way she said space, as if my sanctuary of wood and varnish was suddenly a quaint, pathetic little hobby room. She walked into the center of the workshop, her heels clicking decisively on the wide plank floors. She avoided looking at the instruments hanging in various states of repair on the walls, her eyes scanning the room as if she were an appraiser taking inventory. She stopped in front of my main workbench and placed the portfolio on a clear spot, the sound of the expensive leather hitting the wood unnervingly loud in the stillness. "I want a divorce, Leo," she announced. The words didn't crash over me like a wave. They landed like 4 small, perfectly polished stones, cold and heavy in the pit of my stomach. There was no prelude, no sadness in her eyes, no tremor of regret in her voice. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the chilling finality of a banker closing an account. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing before me with the Clara I had shared my life with. The Clara who had laughed with me over silly movies, who had held my hand during my father's funeral, who had once claimed the scent of sawdust was her favorite smell in the world. That woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, a corporate raider with my wife's face. A divorce. I finally managed, my own voice sounding distant and hollow. "Yes." She tapped the portfolio. "It's over. I've spoken with an attorney. My terms are in here." I didn't move to open it. I couldn't. My hands, usually so steady and precise, felt clumsy and numb. She seemed to have anticipated this, and with a small, impatient sigh, she listed her demands like items on a grocery list. She wanted the house. My grandmother's house. The house whose every groan and sigh I knew, whose history was entwined with my own. She wanted 80% of our savings, the money we had carefully accumulated over the years, my modest earnings supplementing her much more substantial income from her marketing director position at a high-end design firm. And she wanted spousal support. Not for a transitional period, but for a minimum of 10 years, a sum that would effectively cripple me financially for the foreseeable future. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostile takeover. When she finished her recitation, she leaned back against the workbench, crossing her arms. A flicker of something that looked like smug satisfaction crossed her features. "And I don't want to fight on this, Leo," she said, her voice softening into a tone of condescending pity that was somehow more painful than the demands themselves. "Let's be realistic. You're a wonderful craftsman, I'll always say that. But you make a craftsman's living. You can't afford a real lawyer, not the kind you'd need to fight me. My attorney will bury you in motions and fees before you ever get near a judge. It's better for everyone, especially you, if you just agree to the terms and we can both move on." I looked at this woman, this stranger, and a profound, glacial coldness seeped into my bones. This wasn't just about leaving me. This was about erasing me. She saw my quiet nature, my chosen life of humble artistry, as a weakness to be exploited. She believed my inability to match her financial firepower was her ultimate weapon. She thought she had already won, that the battle was over before it had even begun. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside and the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart. I thought of my grandmother, of the love and labor I had poured into this house. I thought of the future I had envisioned, now turning to smoke and ash before my eyes. Clara watched me, her expression confident, waiting for the inevitable surrender. I let out a long, slow breath, the air leaving my lungs like the last sigh of a dying instrument. I looked at her, my face a carefully constructed mask of resignation. And I gave her the two words she was expecting to hear. "You're right." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and absolute. The tension in her shoulders eased, and a small, triumphant smile touched her lips. The simple, sentimental luthier wasn't going to fight. She had won. "Good," she said, pushing herself off the workbench. She smoothed the front of her blazer, her composure perfectly restored. "I'm glad you're being sensible about this. You'll be served with the official papers sometime next week." Then, without another glance at me or the workshop that had been a part of our shared life for a decade, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking a sharp, victorious rhythm down the stairs. I stood frozen in the center of my workshop, surrounded by the silent, wooden bodies of things I knew how to fix, my own life shattered into pieces I had no idea how to put back together. For 3 days, I was a ghost in my own home. I drifted from room to room, each object a painful testament to a life that was no longer mine. The ceramic mug I had made for Clara in a pottery class, the photograph on the mantel of us laughing on a beach in Oregon, the worn armchair where she used to read, they were all artifacts from a buried civilization. The house, my sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. The scent of varnish and wood from my workshop, which had always brought me such peace, now seemed to smell of decay. Clara was right about one thing. I couldn't afford to fight her. Not on her terms. The thought of losing my grandmother's home, of being stripped of my savings and burdened with debt, was a physical weight, a suffocating pressure in my chest. I felt small and powerless, just as she intended me to feel. She had planned her attack with precision, leveraging my gentle nature and modest finances against me like a master strategist. What Clara knew about me was that I was a man of simple means. She knew I valued sentiment over stock portfolios. She also knew that I had an older brother, Julian. And what she was banking on, the cornerstone of her entire strategy, was that Julian and I hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years. Julian is not a luthier. Julian is a force of nature. He is, without a hint of hyperbole, the most sought-after and formidable divorce attorney in Cedar Creek. His firm, Vance and Sterling, occupies the top 2 floors of a glass and steel tower downtown, a world away from my quiet, dusty workshop. Where I restore, Julian dissects. Where I seek harmony, he thrives on conflict. His name is spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the halls of the county courthouse. He is a legal predator, and for all intents and purposes, he was no longer a part of my life. Our falling out had been quiet, but absolute. After our parents passed away within a year of each other, we were left adrift in our shared grief, and we handled it in profoundly different ways. I sought solace in memory in preserving the past. I wanted to establish a small music scholarship in our mother's name at the local community college, a quiet tribute to the woman who had filled our childhood home with Bach and Beethoven. It was a modest proposal, requiring a small endowment from the estate. Julian, ever the pragmatist, saw it as a sentimental, financially unsound gesture. He was already building his empire, and he viewed our inheritance as capital. He argued that the money would be better invested, that legacy was built through power and influence, not quiet gestures. The world doesn't run on sentiment, Leo, he had told me, his voice sharp with an impatience I couldn't comprehend at the time. It runs on strength. We had a bitter, painful argument that wasn't really about the money. It was about our divergent philosophies, two brothers looking at the world, and at the memory of our parents, through irreconcilable lenses. The argument ended with a canyon of proud, wounded silence between us. We hadn't spoken a word since. Clara had been there for the bitter aftermath of that schism. She had seen my profound sadness and my stubborn refusal to bridge the gap. In her cold, strategic calculation, my most powerful potential ally was a ghost, a resource I was too proud and too broken to ever call upon. She was certain I was completely, utterly alone. She was wrong. On the fourth day after her announcement, I hit the bottom of the abyss I had been falling into. I woke up to the gray, pre-dawn light, the house silent and cold around me, and I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a spark of anger. Not a hot, raging fire, but a slow, quiet burn. Anger at being underestimated. Anger at being dismissed. Anger at the thought of letting Clara and her soulless ambition erase my past and cripple my future. From the very bottom, there was nowhere to go but up. I got out of bed, my movements stiff but purposeful. I went to my office, a small room off the living room, and dug through a box of old papers, my hands shaking. Inside, under a stack of my father's old tax returns, I found it, an old business card of Julian's. Not his main office line, but a private number he had given me years ago for emergencies. My heart pounded against my ribs. This was an emergency. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the numbers. Every ounce of my pride, the same stubborn pride that had cost me 5 years with my brother, screamed at me to stop. It was a useless, hollow pride, and I let it go. I dialed the number. I expected it to go to a crisp-voiced assistant or straight to voicemail. But after 2 rings, a deep, familiar voice answered, sharp and alert even at this early hour. Julian Vance. My own voice was a dry whisper. Julian, I said. It's Leo. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to hang up. I could picture him on the other end, in his sleek downtown apartment, the city lights spread out below him, wondering what ghost from the past was calling. Leo, he finally said, the name sounding strange and foreign after so many years. Then his voice softened, losing its hard, professional edge and taking on a tone I hadn't heard since we were boys. Tommy? What's wrong? And, just like that, the dam broke. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my pain crumbled. It all came pouring out, the coldness of Clara's announcement, the impossible demands, her condescending pity, the predatory lawyer, and her final, arrogant taunt. You can't afford a real lawyer to fight me. I told him everything, my voice cracking with the shame and sorrow I had been holding in for days. When I finished, another long silence descended. This one felt different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with something heavy and dangerous. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was transformed. The surprise was gone, replaced by something I recognized from a lifetime ago. It was the sound of a protective older brother. It was the sound of steel being unsheathed. She said what? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I repeated Clara's words, my own voice steadier now. Okay, he said, his tone clipped and decisive. Okay. When and where's the first court appearance? Next Tuesday morning, I told him, reading the details from the top letter in Clara's portfolio. The county courthouse downtown. Preliminary hearing. I'll clear my schedule, he said simply. There was no hesitation. Don't talk to her, Leo. Don't talk to her lawyer. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything. Don't even look at her if you can help it. Just show up on Tuesday. I'll meet you there. Julian, I started, not sure how to thank him, not sure what this meant. I'll see you Tuesday, Tommy, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. And then he hung up. I sat there in the quiet office, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding with a dizzying mixture of terror and a wild, terrifying hope. Clara thought she had disarmed me, that she had cut me off from my only potential support. She had no idea that her own arrogance, her own cruelty, had just forced me to bridge a 5-year divide. She thought she was walking into a simple, uncontested victory. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the quiet man and about what family really means. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned gray and miserable, a persistent, chilling drizzle slicking the streets of Cedar Creek. The weather felt like a perfect reflection of my mood. I walked into the county courthouse alone, feeling every bit the part of the defeated man Clara expected me to be. I was wearing my one good suit, a charcoal gray wool that I normally reserved for weddings and funerals. It felt like a bit of both. I found the designated courtroom, a sterile, impersonal chamber that smelled of old paper, floor polish, and low-grade anxiety. Clara was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked magnificent. She was wearing a sharp, cream-colored suit that radiated power and success. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she exuded an aura of unshakable confidence. Next to her sat her lawyer, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a self-satisfied smirk that seemed to be a permanent facial feature. They were whispering and laughing quietly together as I entered. Clara's gaze met mine across the room. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and her expression shifted to one of faint, dismissive pity. I probably looked as lost and forlorn as I felt. I refused to let my own gaze drop. I met her eyes, kept my face a blank mask, and walked with as much dignity as I could muster to the defendant's table on the opposite side of the room. I sat down, placed my old, worn leather briefcase on the table, and waited. After a moment, her lawyer, whose name I now knew was Arthur Croft, sauntered over. He looked me up and down as if I were a piece of unsatisfactory furniture. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice using a practiced, patronizing warmth. "I'm glad you've come. I trust you've had time to review my client's very generous proposal. To be frank, it's the best deal you're going to get. If you're prepared to sign today, we can make this quick and painless for everyone." "I'm waiting for my counsel," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. Croft actually chuckled, a short, barking sound of amusement. "Your counsel? Mr. Vance, let's not drag this out. The judge won't appreciate the theatrics." He gave a condescending pat to the air near my shoulder and walked back to his table, shaking his head slightly as he shared a private joke with Clara. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense efficiency, entered and took her seat on the bench. She glanced down at the docket in front of her. "Case number 73B, Vance versus Vance," she announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "Are both parties present and represented by counsel?" Arthur Croft rose smoothly to his feet. "Yes, Your Honor." Arthur Croft, representing the plaintiff, Ms. Clara Vance. The judge looked at me expectantly. "And the defendant?" Before I could form a response, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud that broke the solemn quiet. Every head in the room swiveled toward the entrance. Walking down the center aisle was my brother. Julian didn't just wear a suit, he inhabited it. It was a perfectly tailored suit of dark navy blue, a suit of armor woven from thread and pure intimidation. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, his gleaming leather briefcase swinging rhythmically at his side. A wave of whispers and murmurs rippled through the courtroom as other lawyers and court staff recognized him. His reputation preceded him like a physical aura. He didn't look at anyone else in the room. His eyes, sharp and focused, were fixed on me. He walked directly to my table, put a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder, and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. Then he sat down beside me, placing his briefcase on the table with a solid, definitive click. The sound seemed to echo in the now silent room, a declaration in itself. I risked a glance over at Clara. The smug, confident expression had been wiped clean from her face. It was replaced by a mask of utter, horrified disbelief. Her jaw was slack, her skin had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. Her eyes were wide, darting from Julian's face to mine and back again, as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. She looked as though a marble statue from a museum had just walked in and taken a seat at the opposing table. Her lawyer, Arthur Croft, looked even worse. The color had drained completely from his face, and his permanent smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew exactly who my brother was. Every lawyer in Cedar Creek knew. Julian leaned over to me, his presence a solid, calming wall beside me, ignoring the stunned silence of the room. "Sorry I'm late, Tommy," he whispered, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Traffic was a nightmare." Then he straightened up, his demeanor shifting instantly to one of cool, formidable professionalism. He looked directly at the judge, who was staring at him with her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Julian Vance, Your Honor," he said, his voice a commanding baritone that filled every corner of the room with effortless authority. "A Vance and Sterling. Representing the defendant, Mr. Leo Vance." The judge's eyebrows shot up even higher. She knew the name. Everyone did. A man like Julian Vance didn't typically handle preliminary hearings in this courtroom. His presence signaled that this was no longer a simple, uncontested divorce. Then, Julian turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, toward the plaintiff's table. He looked at Arthur Croft, whose panicked expression was now comical, and then his eyes settled on Clara. He gave her a cold, razor-thin smile that held no warmth at all. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. He paused, letting the weight of his presence sink in. Then he looked at Clara again, his eyes locking onto hers, and delivered the line that shattered her entire meticulously planned world. "He doesn't have to afford me," Julian stated, his voice calm and clear. "I'm his older brother." The game had just been irrevocably changed. Clara thought she was attending a coronation. She had just walked into an ambush. Julian opened his gleaming briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of his own files, and the gentle, reflective work of demolition began. The 2 months that followed that first court appearance were a masterclass in legal warfare, executed with a quiet, devastating precision. My brother Julian does not do things by halves. He doesn't just practice law, he wages it with strategy, discipline, and an absolute refusal to lose. Clara and her lawyer, Arthur Croft, had expected to roll over a soft target. Instead, they found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless, systematic deconstruction of their entire case. The first move Julian made was to file a motion for discovery that was, by all legal accounts, a thing of terrible beauty. It wasn't a request, it was an archaeological excavation permit for Clara's entire financial life. He demanded every bank statement, every credit card bill, every work expense report, every digital transaction, every communication related to her finances for the past 5 years. Arthur Croft, trying to regain some semblance of control, filed a motion to have it dismissed as overly broad, harassing, and punitive. The judge, who was now clearly treating Julian with a level of deference that bordered on reverence, took one look at my brother's meticulously argued justification and approved our motion in full. Clara was now legally obligated to turn over the keys to her financial kingdom. She thought she was clever, that she had covered her tracks in the digital ether. She had no idea she was dealing with a man who employed a team of forensic accountants who could find a single misplaced comma in the tax code. While Clara and Croft were drowning in a sea of paperwork, Julian began a campaign of quiet, targeted pressure. He scheduled a series of depositions, not just with Clara, but with her closest friends, her family members, and several of her senior colleagues at her design firm. His strategy, as he explained it to me during one of our late-night calls, was not to create explosions, but to slowly and methodically apply pressure to the weak points until the truth was squeezed out. People want to protect liars, Leo, he told me, his voice calm and analytical. But they rarely want to become liars themselves, especially under oath. The breakthrough came during the deposition of Clara's best friend, a woman named Sarah Albright. Sarah was fiercely loyal to Clara, but she was a kind, somewhat nervous person, and no match for my brother's gentle, incisive questioning. For 3 hours, Julian was polite, charming, and utterly relentless. He asked her about Clara's spending habits, her frequent work trips, her general happiness in our marriage. Sarah's answers were vague and evasive. Then, Julian leaned forward slightly, his demeanor still friendly, and asked the question that cracked the entire case wide open. "Miss Albright," he said, his voice soft. "Can you tell me about a gentleman named Alastair Finch?" I was sitting next to Julian, and I saw Sarah flinch. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but in the silent deposition room, it was a thunderclap. The name was completely unfamiliar to me. Julian just waited, letting the silence hang in the air. Sarah tried to play dumb, stammering that she didn't know anyone by that name. Julian nodded sympathetically and then produced a thin file folder. From it, he pulled a series of credit card statements. "This is a credit card Mr. Vance was unaware of," Julian explained calmly, sliding a statement across the table to Sarah's lawyer. "It's a corporate card, but the statements were being sent to a private post office box. A card that, our forensic accountant discovered, was being paid off by regular, hidden transfers from your friends and my client's joint savings account. An account Ms. Vance had been siphoning money from for nearly 2 years. He pointed a pen to a series of charges on the statement. A 5-night stay at a luxury spa hotel in wine country. A charge for over $5,000 at a high-end jewelry boutique. A series of lavish dinners for 2 at some of the most expensive restaurants in the state. Ms. Vance was, according to her work calendar, attending a design conference on these dates," Julian continued, his voice still gentle. "But her employer has confirmed that no such conference existed. You were not with her on this trip, were you, Ms. Albright?" Sarah shook her head, looking miserable. "So I ask you again," Julian said, his voice losing its softness and gaining a hard, clear edge. "Who is Alastair Finch?" Sarah broke. Under penalty of perjury, with her own lawyer advising her to tell the truth, she admitted it. Alastair Finch was an art consultant Clara had met through her work. He was the man she had been having an affair with for the last 18 months. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The late nights at the office. The unexplained business trips. The financial demands. The unshakable confidence. She wasn't just leaving me, she was leaving me for someone else. She was attempting to strip mine our marriage for assets, using my own money to fund her new, upgraded life with her lover. Her grand plan was to have me subsidize my own replacement. The deposition of Alastair Finch himself was even more illuminating. He was a smug, arrogant man with a cultivated accent and an expensive watch. But his arrogance crumbled quickly under Julian's relentless, surgical questioning. He admitted to the affair. He admitted that he and Clara had planned the divorce together, strategizing for months. He even admitted, with a shocking lack of shame, that it was his idea for her to demand the house and the exorbitant spousal support, telling her that I was a sentimental fool, who would be too gentle and too poor to fight back. They had underestimated me. More importantly, they had underestimated my family. With these depositions, documented and sworn, Clara's case wasn't just weakened. It was annihilated. She had committed perjury in her initial filings by attesting to the fidelity of the marriage. She had fraudulently hidden marital assets. She was, in the cold, hard language of the law, a liar and a cheat. Arthur Croft called Julian's office a day later, his voice stripped of all its former condescension. He sounded panicked, desperate. He said Clara was willing to drop all of her demands. She would walk away with just her personal belongings, he pleaded. Just make it stop. Julian's reply was cold and final. No, he said, with me listening on the speakerphone in his office. Walking away is a privilege she has not earned. We are not settling. We are going to court, and we are going to present the truth. He hung up the phone and looked at me. She wanted a fight, he said, his expression grim. Now she has won. It has been 6 months since I first walked into that cold, sterile courtroom, a man who believed he had lost everything that mattered. Today, sitting on the porch of my grandmother's house, the house that is still my home, I can tell you that I was wrong. I didn't lose anything of true value. In fact, I gained it all back. The final court date was less of a battle and more of a formal surrender. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence against her, the depositions, the forensic accounting reports, the proof of her long-term affair and her conspiracy to commit fraud, Clara had no choice but to capitulate completely. Arthur Croft, looking tired and utterly defeated, advised her to accept any terms we offered. And the terms my brother drafted were not vengeful, but they were just. They were a masterwork of quiet, righteous demolition. Clara didn't just walk away with nothing, she walked away with less than nothing. She was forced to relinquish any and all claim to the house. Her demand for spousal support was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never ask for it again. And because Julian was able to prove, down to the last penny, that she had spent over $70,000 of marital assets on her affair, on hotels, gifts, and lavish vacations with Alastair Finch, the judge ordered that the full amount be deducted from her share of our remaining savings and returned to me. She left the marriage with a small fraction of what she had, a mountain of her own legal bills, and the quiet humiliation of having her entire sordid scheme laid bare in a court of law. The fallout in her personal life was just as swift and devastating. Her lover, Alastair, faced with the legal and social repercussions of his role in the conspiracy, ended their relationship almost immediately. He was a man attracted to success and power, and Clara had just suffered a spectacular, public defeat. Many of her friends, some of whom had been forced to testify about her deceptions under oath, quietly distanced themselves from her. In her single-minded pursuit of a new, better life, she had torched her old one, losing her home, her savings, her partner in crime, and her reputation in one fell swoop. All because she underestimated the quiet man she was married to and the bonds she couldn't see. But that's not the real story. The most important part of this whole painful chapter is what happened with my brother. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Julian called me. His voice was different, lighter than I'd heard it in years. "Meet me at the workshop, Tommy," he asked. "I want to see what you do." He arrived on a Saturday afternoon, dressed not in a suit, but in jeans and a simple gray sweater. He looked younger, less like a legal titan and more like the brother I grew up with. He stepped into my workshop, his eyes taking in the scene with a genuine curiosity he'd never shown before. He ran his hand over the smooth, curved back of a cello I was restoring, his fingers tracing the intricate grain of the wood. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't talk about Clara. He asked me about the different types of wood, about how I could possibly get such a high gloss on the varnish, about the history of the instruments hanging on the walls. I explained the patient, painstaking process of bringing a broken thing back to life, of finding its lost voice. After a long, comfortable silence, he looked at an old, dust-covered cello case leaning in the corner. "Is that Mom's?" he asked softly. I nodded. "It is. The soundpost is cracked and the bridge needs to be completely reshaped. I've never had the heart to start on it." He looked at me, his gaze direct and clear. "I was wrong, Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "About the scholarship. About everything. I was so focused on building walls, on becoming strong enough that nothing could ever hurt me again, that I forgot what was actually important. I forgot what Mom and Dad taught us. It's not about being impervious. It's about being able to heal." Tears welled in my eyes. I was wrong, too, I admitted, my voice thick. I was so stuck in the past, so proud and stubborn. I let that silence go on for 5 years. "I should have called you." He smiled, a real, warm smile. Well, I'm glad she was arrogant enough to make you. We decided, that afternoon, to keep our parents' memory alive, not just through a scholarship, but through action. We took on a project together. Not selling the family home or investing its proceeds, but something far more meaningful. We started a small foundation in our parents' name, using a portion of my recovered assets and a more than generous contribution from Julian. The Vance Foundation provides restored instruments and free music lessons to underprivileged children in Cedar Creek. Julian handles the legal and financial structure. I handle the instruments. Last weekend, we brought our mother's cello onto the workbench. Together, side by side, we began the slow, meticulous process of restoring it. Julian, the fearsome attorney, learning to hold a sound post-setter with a steady hand, a look of intense concentration on his face. It's not a memorial to the past anymore. It's a project for our future, a harmony we are creating together. Clara's parting shot to me was that I couldn't afford to fight for my life. Her greed, her arrogance, her belief that I was weak and alone, that was the very thing that forced me to make the call that brought my brother back to me. She thought she was isolating me from my greatest strength. Instead, she reunited me with him. She tried to leave me with nothing. But as I stand here today, in my home, with the scent of sawdust in the air and my brother by my side, I realize I have everything that truly matters. I have myself, I have my craft, and I have my family. I have been restored.